Okay. So, good morning, everybody. Lovely to be sitting with you. Here we are on the third day. And actually, before I go any further, just a quick check. Is volume all right? Bernd, what do you think? And yeah, okay.
Yes,
Okay.
perfect, Henry, perfect.
Thank you very much. And I'm just going to have a quick little glance at all the lovely folks online. Thanks for being here, everybody, for sharing your practice and being willing to all of us play our part in the great way of the Dharma, in the great way of existence, and how to live more wisely and kindly, more conscious of our participation in this great unfolding. Thank you. So yes, third day. We're probably. I want to just share something my teacher John, Valerie's great friend, as I've heard him say, is that there's a sort of sequence that goes on in retreats, actually, and I've heard him parse it out in different ways. One way I heard him say it was that first there's settling, then there's releasing, and that's often the sort of bumpiest part of the ride. Then there's realizing, and then there's returning. Settling, releasing, realizing, returning. And it's a lovely formula, for practice in all kinds of shapes and sizes and durations and intensities. You could almost have it as the overall path of practice. We settle our nervous systems. We start releasing assumptions and preconceptions. We start realizing stuff that, wasn't the way we thought, not at all. Great assumptions are overturned. We realize more clearly sort of our participation in this experience and our non-participation in it as well. What is not part of it? What is truly what we are? Realizing that, and then returning, meaning how do we live that and share that? So I think you can carve it up other ways, of course, but if you just, and it also tends not to be so tidily sequential that we'll get we might realize something and then we're back to being unsettled. It's perfectly okay. It's a mix. It's a swirl and a mix, but overall we're realizing more and more, and we're integrating. Might be another word for returning. More and more integrating and expressing the gifts of our realizations, more and more integrated into our lives. Beautiful, beautiful thing to be doing. A great, true sort of use of a human life. How marvelous not to be just blindly driven by our drives, our evolutionarily inherited drives. How amazing to put a stop and let them and discover them. This is what the Buddhist three poisons are all about. They're about our biological incentive system, as the philosopher William Irvin puts it. The inherited drives, desire, craving, clinging, greed, number one, number two, aversion, anger, ill will, hatred, number three, misunderstanding, ignorance, delusion. And how wonderful to have a refuge from the propulsion that they would otherwise exert. How wonderful that, you know, we are all inheritors of a refuge, a deep, ancient, immemorial human refuge that has been found. You know, I mean, presumably it's a lot older than 2,500 years, this refuge. Presumably it was discovered sometime back in the mid-Paleolithic, who knows, you know, maybe even earlier, I don't know, you know, lower Paleolithic, I think they call it, meaning, you know, somewhere maybe Homo erectus cottoned onto it. And they're the most amazing human species perhaps there's ever been. They survived for nearly 2 million years, Homo erectus, and they you know, morphed into sapiens, I guess. You know, I don't, they're trying to figure out what exactly happened, but hey, sapiens pops out, you know, maybe 200,000 years ago. Maybe some now think 200. I think there was a fine 295,000 years ago for sapiens remains in Morocco recently. But anyway, erectus carried on beyond that anyway. So somewhere we discovered that it was while, you know, these evolutionary drives are still with us, you know, that actually it is possible to have refuge. That great Buddhist term, refuge, is so right. Refuge from what? Well, basically from them. You know, we sort of settle ourselves enough to become cognizant of them rather than merely being driven by them. And as we release them, as we give them space and allow them, sort of grow in our capacity to hold them, you know, we start to see through them. We start to see that they're not what they seem. That, and we start to see that actually a lot of the construction of how this world is and who and what we are, that they engender, also starts to fall away. And sometimes it falls away, it just falls away. I mean, it always really falls away by itself. We just do our practice and keep, you know, training, and these obscurations fall away. That's kind of on one level why we're here. So, okay, right. This talk, I'm going to go back to Bodhidharma. So that first talk on the 4 marks was Bodhidharma's first kind of salvo in China, the first great lion's roar of Zen or Dhyana Buddhism on the shores of the Middle Kingdom. And today I want to look at his second salvo. This was a document. It's pretty well known by anybody who knows the history of Zen. Actually, it's called the 2 entrances or 2 gates. By the way, last time I think I was talking about how scholars had kind of poo-pooed Bodhidharma as a historical figure, as just a kind of legendary personage, and, you know, look at these gullible Western practitioners who think he's a real person, etc. Well, actually, now it's swung round again, and I think there really was a historical Bodhidharma. That's partly because of a ton of, a little cache of documents that were found in that huge trove of. There's some caves in China, the Dung Wang caves, where a whole vast library of documents have been found. And it's some decades back now. And it's taking a very long time for scholars to painstakingly go through all the documents that are there. And maybe, I forget, 20 years ago or something, one little stash in there was what has been known as the Bodhidharma Anthology. And it's a sort of set of documents that seem to be by somebody actually called Bodhidharma, who actually did live in the 6th century and actually had come from India, kind of corroborating the old legend. You know, maybe he wasn't 130 years old when he arrived in China, and maybe he wasn't 150 years old when he walked back to India holding one sandal, having also left behind not only one sandal, but so it seemed his body in a cave in the last place he was living, bear's ears. And in that place, there was a cave where they thought they'd buried him, and they rolled away the stone. 3 days later, after his burial, no Bodhidharma, no body, just a sandal, and somebody else saw him walking down the road with a sandal. Say, where are you going? I'm going home. What do you mean home? I'm going back to India. So at the age of 150, dead or alive, who knows? Maybe he was really had sort of somehow become so released that he could do that very thing that's announced at the beginning of the Gateless Gate. Walk. How does it go? Walk alone in the universe, between life and death, or neither life nor death. And in Wu Men's comment on Mu, he says, though you find yourself on the brink of life and death, you play in innocent samadhi, utter innocence. It's so amazing. Anyway, who knows? But that's the Bodhidharma. And this is what he was bringing, is exactly what Wu Men said, playing in innocence on the brink of life and death. The samadhi of innocent play, I think he called it. Somehow life and death have sort of lost their meaning. I mean, how extraordinary that we can be that freed of these primal concepts, primal assumptions. They're assumptions made about this moment, that there's a thing called life and a thing called death. I mean, I don't want to push too hard because many of you think I'll be really think this is crazy, but it is. What if it's possible just at least to consider letting go those deep concepts? What would this be like now if you just didn't have the thought of life or death? What would this now be like? And practice can actually relieve us of such deep concepts. And life is, if it is life, it's different. Okay. We're going to be looking at these two gates of the real Bodhidharma. But first, let me just say something I just want to share with you. That this great project we're doing here in this practice is examining the live human, as I was saying in the first sit. The experience from within of a live human. This human body, heart, mind, from within, examining it. And we got two projects within that. The first, is to shift this live human experience away from suffering toward well-being. And that's mostly done by acknowledging suffering, by reclaiming it. You'll note the first noble truth, there is suffering. By welcoming it back into darn. I'm having trouble with my own writing. Again, welcoming it back, by welcoming it back into something. Oh, yeah. Yeah, into the little, where it's been hiding in little nooks and crannies of suffering that we've forgotten. We don't want them left out. We actually want to bring them back into awareness and tend them. This is a reclamation project. It's a bigger love project. So the love is big enough to reclaim forgotten, unknown pockets of suffering within our being. It's so important. It's so important, this. But then the other related project, kind of what I was saying, is examining this experience. And as we do that, in order to do it better, we need to release unexamined assumptions and hypotheses. We want raw data, not preconceptions. So we gradually, this is the big thing, what do? We let go of knowing, of our ways of knowing experience. We open as we're ready to the naked immensity of this moment. The naked immensity of this moment. We may find various things. The consciousness, for a start, is not, after all, contained in the skull, nor even in this body. It's somehow all-encompassing. It's boundless. It has no size, actually. It is a realm without size. And it starts to become who we are. We start to recognize that that's who we are. We see ourself. We see that we ourself, we are nothing more than a fold in the swirl of consciousness. We're part of it. We are not made of me. We are made of a sizeless, all-pervasive awareness. That's one thing we might see. Or we see that the real fabric of this consciousness is actually no fabric. There's a kind of state prior to the emergence of consciousness, actually, except it's an utter absence. It's not a state at all. It's a marvelous absence. Yet it's incomparably full of potentiality. I mean, by the way, actually, Theravada Buddhism knows about this. And then I wanted to read you something from a deep practitioner called Stephen Snyder, who's a sort of new acquaintance of mine, talking about cessation, which is the Theravada word for this discovery of sort of nothing. He says, well, we could say in Buddhism, if there's a goal, I'm quoting from an interview he did, actually, that then the goal would be nirvana. And that's talked about in a lot of different ways, but fundamentally, the real power of it and the source quality of it is that it's an experience of cessation of consciousness, cessation of all types of body identification, really a cessation of all materiality and mentality. So there's no consciousness. There's no awareness in the real heart of the eye of the hurricane, he says. Just stillness, but coming out of that, there's the potentiality for all manifestation, all form, all concepts. All of that is there. And then it sort of starts to emerge from it into concept, space, variety of other qualities, and ultimately into form, which is where, we are. But all of that's happening at once. It's here right now. It's not an abstract thing. This is actually the sort of structure of reality almost. So anyway, just acknowledging that, Mahayana Buddhism hasn't got an exclusive thing on this. It's known throughout Buddhism, really deep down. The task, so, is to come home to this first, to tumble back into it, and then to realize more consistently that that's who we are. I mean, and how does this happen? Well, it happens in part by this not knowing, releasing knowing. This brings me to that marvelous Christian mystic, John of the Cross. He had it so right. He talked about the dark night of the soul. And actually, he did not mean, according to my reading, the reading I've done of others who comment on this, he didn't mean at all what is usually taken to mean. People talk about the dark night of the soul as some sort of pit of despair that spiritual practitioners fall into. No, well, that may or may not happen, of course, at times. But he didn't mean that at all. He meant the dark night of not knowing. It's a wondrous night. It's a wondrous darkness. I mean, you could feel it here and now. You're looking at the daylight in a room, or maybe it's, I don't know, maybe it's getting dark in some parts of people on this retreat. But it doesn't matter. You turn on the lights. The dark night is still here. It's a wondrous dark. It's a soft, all-embracing dark of not knowing that opens us up to somehow to a sort of pervasive, sweet, pervasive awareness that's sweet because it's loving. That's the true dark night. And it's in that dark night of not knowing, according to John of the Cross, that we can find God. You know, and I don't know what he meant by that. I haven't got that far in the whatever his book was called, you know. Anyway, now Bodhidharma, what does he say about it? 2 entrances. It's a short document, and I'll see if I can read the whole thing, but we'll see. 2 entrances. So this would be from maybe 550 or something like that. I say that because in this document I've got, which I found on a website, it gives Bodhidharma's dates as 440 to 533. I don't know whether that would be pretty speculative. And it puts him dying at 93, which is kind of a little disappointing, really, you know, but whatever. Anyway, here is this document that maybe this little, you know, weightless, sort of skimpy man, strange, powerful, fleshless man from India. So light, he walked home at the age of 150. So light, he just sat in a cave for 9 years, floated in utter beauty in that cave for 9 years. You know, how wonderful. Anyway, here's his document. It says there's two entrances to practice. The entrance of principle, number 1. It's to become enlightened to reality. I mean, he's basically talking about this experience of realization, realizing that all this is appearing and made of nothing but appearing. And we are that. It's a sudden, this is the, you know, the true sudden awakening thing. Suddenly the solidity just falls away and the sense of self is gone. It's seen to have been a cloud, a mirage, a reflection. And all this world is seen to have been a reflection on nothing. I just see it. So Valerie put it so beautifully. You know, that, I mean, it could be at different levels, of course, but that solid surfaces, they're like sound. It's this lovely, lovely expression, Valerie. Wow. And another beautiful expression of Valerie's. We've been sitting in the bottom of a well. We didn't know it. And all of a sudden, we're out of the well. The well's disappeared. It's boundless openness. And nobody in the middle, where the knot in the middle is untied. And it was only a knot. It wasn't even that, but it seemed to be a knot. Me, untied, just part of the vast openness. That's the entrance by principle. You know, that's got no rhyme or reason. It's got the rhyme or reason of reality, but on the practice side, it doesn't. It just happens. Now, because it just happens, it's unreliable. So there's another entrance. Mercifully, there's another entrance, which is the entrance of practice. The entrance of practice, this is what he says. There are 4 practices which encompass all other practices. These are, number 1, the practice of retribution of enmity, the practice of acceptance of circumstances, the practice of the absence of craving, number 3, and the practice of accordance with the Dharma, number 4. Okay, so we're going to just whiz through them. Bodhidharma's words on them, most of them. What is the practice of retribution of enmity? There's a bit of a mouthful. What does it mean? This: when the practitioner experiences suffering, she thinks to herself, for innumerable eons, I've wandered through various kinds of existence, forsaking the fundamental for the derivative, forsaking the absolute for appearances, being caught by appearances, generating a great deal of enmity and aversion, those poisons, and bringing an unlimited amount of injury and discord upon others. My present suffering now constitutes the fruition of my past crimes and karma, rather than anything bequeathed to me from any heavenly or human being. It's simply the natural unfolding of my actions in the past. I shall accept it patiently, without complaint. Okay, now, yeah, I mean, you can hear obviously there's past life theory at work in there. But what about if we, I mean, it's so easy really to sort of transfer that to just human evolutionary programming, coding, and the sort of 1,000 generation history of trauma, and the million generation history of, no, we haven't got that many actually, 5,000 generation history of the inherited impulses, drives, poisons at work in us. It's sort of the same point really, isn't it? Accepting that this is how we're built for now, but we're not going to quite stop there, but we're accepting it. So when misfortunes come, that we can do nothing about, I mean, we will do what we can to staunch them and to tend them, of course, to tend the fallout and those who survive and so on. But on some level, they themselves are teaching us something about our place in this world and the inevitability of our limitations of our control, and the necessity for us to be prepared to accept heartbreak and sometimes great anxiety on behalf of our nearest and dearest. How to sort of surrender to that. This is what this old sage is advocating. Surrender. It's radical acceptance, as it's sometimes called, which really I think is another word for surrender. It's a kind of radical patience. In a way, it's a radical trust. It's trusting that this is what needs to be somehow. It may break our hearts, and we're going to let them break. We're going to trust somehow. Point 1, that's actually pretty much a direct match with the first noble truth. There is suffering. Number 2 are these practices of Bodhidharma. Like this. The second is the practice of acceptance of circumstances. You might think it's a little similar. Let's see. Beings have no unchanging self. They have no fixed self and are entirely subject to the impact of circumstances. Whether one experiences suffering or pleasure, both are generated from one's circumstances. If one experiences fame, fortune, and other forms of superior karmic retribution, this is the result of past causes. Although one may experience good fortune now, when the circumstances responsible for its showing up are exhausted, it will disappear. How, therefore, could one take joy in good fortune? Since success and failure depend on circumstances, the mind should remain unchanged. It should be unmoved, even by the winds of good fortune. This is called the practice of acceptance of circumstances. So he's sort of saying, when bad things happen, let's not blame or complain. Let's accept it as somehow our responsibility in some way, some inevitable unfolding that we are part of in some way, you know. On the other hand, when good fortune comes, let us not take credit for it. That too is the unfolding of circumstances, of causation. Not only that, but if we get caught up in it and attached to it, that's a mistake. It will come and it will go. How can we have a mind steady regardless of circumstance? It reminds me of the Elizabethan essayist Francis Bacon, who was a sage. And he said, he was really looking back to the classics, the ancient philosophers of Greece and Rome. He said, what we should seek, what we should cultivate is fortitude in adversity. Fortitude in adversity. And temperance in prosperity. Fortitude in adverse conditions. I think today we'd call that resilience, but also temperance in prosperity. Humble before good fortune. Neither clinging to it nor claiming credit. Humble. Patient, number one. Humble, number two. Seems to be something like it. But also there's an echo here in this second one of the second noble truth, is that craving is the cause of suffering. Is the origin of suffering, is craving. Because it's craving what we want, clinging to what we want, grasping and holding to what we want. That's in here, right? Third practice of Bodhidharma is the absence of craving. It's just like the third noble truth. The end of suffering comes with the end of craving, cessation. Various kinds of envy and attachment that people experience in their never-ending delusion are referred to as craving. The wise person is enlightened to reality, awakened to reality, which is the essential principle that's contrary to human convention, contrary to how we conventionally understand things. Hence the need to go into that dark night of knowing, where we're relinquishing our conventional understanding, so we can discover this principle. They pacify their mind in inactivity and accept whatever happens. understanding that all existence is non-substantial, there without desire. The sutra says to have craving entails suffering. To be without craving means joy. Understand clearly that to be without craving is equivalent to the very practice of the way. This is talking about that cessation. Releasing all holding, releasing all knowing, releasing all holding, all clinging, all grasping, all craving, and somehow the whole structure can release through that. And we're freed. So that's the third of his practice. And then what's the fourth? You think that would wrap it up, really. But there's a fourth one. The fourth is the practice of being in accord with the Dharma. The absolute principle of essential purity, pure because empty, is called Dharma. So Dharma, we hear that word a lot, is sometimes means teaching. It sometimes means law, like the Dharma is the law of nature, the law of cause and effect. And it also is what all the teaching points to. This very reality here and now of what we've been calling cessation this morning, nirvana as cessation. According to this, all characteristics are non-substantial, and there's no defilement and no attachment, no this and no that. All characteristics, all that can be seen and known is empty. So there's no defilement and no attachment, no this and no that, no me, no you. One open, empty field. That's also so full, so full. And then he goes on, since this Dharma is without stinginess, weird. In other words, this Dharma is so generous. Therefore, one should practice giving, dana, giving of one's body, giving of one's life, giving of one's possessions without any regret. In this way, one benefits oneself as well as all others who ornament the path of enlightenment. Here he is, by the way. This is a little Japanese image. Daruma, they call him. It's sort of spelled Daruma, but Dharma, which is short for Bodhidharma. Very sort of important figure, actually, in Japan. The red-bearded barbarian, he's sometimes called. That's another. I see another Dharma. Yeah. So the last definitive words from him is this selfless giving of oneself, body, possessions, self. Just as the Dharma itself is giving. What's it giving as? It's giving us this very moment, here and now, just as it is. You. It's giving you. So these are some thoughts on Zen Basics, back right down to Bodhidharma, and his boundless generosity and his sort of boundless freedom. There's nowhere that craving could arise left in Bodhidharma. He's neither this nor that. I think for him, even if craving did arise, it wouldn't be any problem. One open field. So I don't know whether this is a little bit sort of too deep today, because I don't know quite just why it came out this way, but there we are. As long as we remember that this whole path is about suffering and its reducing, its diminishment in the world, and that it makes sense to not forget our own. In fact, if we forget our own, we're going to get into trouble. That we have multiple dimensions of growth, and we need to be cognizant of that and not get arrogant, think that because we've dealt with one thing, it doesn't mean there aren't other things to deal with. And if we remember that this, if we get lucky maybe and get freer of suffering, the work just begins anew. The world is full of suffering, and it's heartbreaking. And all our effort really is to tend to that. That's why we're doing this. And it's okay. You're included in the project. Don't think that it's selfish to help your own suffering. Of course it's not. We need to be healed if that's required, but at the same time, one of the central causes of suffering is this little knot in the great waves of consciousness that thinks it's a thing and thinks that everything revolves around it and that it must be well. That's a big problem. So we don't want to be forgetting that either, and it actually benefits from our service to others. So it all works together beautifully, and this practice is a kind of there's a place where it all comes together. It really is. Okay, let's stop there. Thank you very, very much, everybody, for listening. Thank you for practicing together, supporting. We're all getting supported by this increasingly deep practice. And if you think it's not increasingly deep for you, don't worry, it is. There's ups and downs, there's ebbs and flows, there's all normal and natural that there should be. And Valerie said it so well. Nothing counteracts bliss like its expectation. Perfect. So if you've had some nice time sitting and think, why aren't I having it again? That's expectation of it coming back and wanting it back. Just do the practice moment by moment. All we ever have to do is this moment now. So if you're thinking about how good it was yesterday, or will it be good this afternoon, it's a thought. Just note it. It's talk in the mind. It's image in the mind. Fine, let it arise. No problem. Just don't get caught by it, or get uncaught as soon as you can. But knowing that it's perfectly normal to get caught, no problem. Yeah, okay. So I'll probably offer a bit more guidance here and there as we go. But thank you. Great.